Gilneas is relevant again, which creates a perfect opportunity to talk about some story, talk about some lore, go into recent events, and if you're a total downer like me, it gives you an opportunity to discuss your least favorite cinematic in all of WoW's history. Warcraft in general, really. Why am I like this? Warcraft has maintained a reputation of having some of the best cinematics in gaming for over 20 years. Ever since Reign of Chaos's release in 2002, little baby gamers, like me, have been awed by the incredible characters, immersive world, and epic battles shown on screen. Legendary figures like Grom Hellscream, Illidan Stormrage, the Lich King have all come to life in gorgeous HD to wow us with climactic battles and iconic lines. No one can dispute the power behind Blizzard Entertainment's cinematics team and their ability to deliver banger after banger for literal decades. New players, drawn in by these dazzling cinematics, may have been disappointed to find that when playing the game, the characters they've seen depicted in this dazzling HD are a little bit lower poly than advertised, and that the gap between what WoW's game engine and its cinematics team are capable of producing isn't exactly small. Here's the Lich King, for example, the titular face of one of WoW's most popular expansions, in the intro cinematic of Wrath of the Lich King. And here he is in the game, looking not awful, but stiff. A bit awkward, using a repeated cycle of generic poses to convey dialogue, just like every other WoW NPC throughout the years. This conveyance of character in-game was limited entirely to models flupping their Muppet mouths and waving their arms around for years. Until the Wrathgate happened. Now, there have been in-engine cinematics done before the Wrathgate, machinima-style promos for raids in the Burning Crusade. These portrayed characters like Zul'jin and Akama gearing up for a battle to come. But the climax of these stories was always a kind of virtual school play, where the players stood around and watched these figures monologue after the raid. Then, those characters stood still forever, waiting for you to leave and come back next week for more loot. The Wrathgate was different. The Wrathgate changed WoW's presentation forever, shifting the game's focus toward a more consistent emphasis on narrative. This cutscene played as a consequence of gameplay, not as a separate world-building element you'd find on YouTube. Unlike every quest prior, this cutscene showed players the consequences of their actions, and a climactic event using in-game assets with a few touch-ups in post-production. See Blizzard's video covering its development for more information. The Wrathgate was a true tour de force, and it set the standard for future expansions. Come the Cataclysm, there are in-game cutscenes peppered throughout the leveling experience to add gravitas to key events. These were smaller in scope than the Wrathgate, and clunky at times, especially given the limited maneuverability of some of the older models, but Cataclysm followed in Wrath's footsteps by including a full Wrathgate-style in-game cinematic to conclude its final raid with the defeat of Deathwing. The next expansion, Mists of Pandaria, provided a partial remedy to the aforementioned clunkiness. The Pandaren, the newest addition to WoW's racial roster, were the focus of the narrative and were gifted with a much higher fidelity model than their counterparts from the previous decade. Look at all those polygons! Mop utilized cutscenes at the very start of its expansion to introduce the conflict and continued to include them throughout the expansion until the very end, where, following the now time-honored tradition, an in-game cinematic concluded the events altogether, bookending years of storytelling. By this point, the team had gotten good at these, and even started doling out more HD models to key figures like Garrosh Hellscream and Vol'jin. Here, we can see the cinematics team's influence going so far as to influence character design. After all, if the spotlight was to be on their in-game models rather than a CGI render, better to give these characters something befitting their status. Warlords of Draenor also started with an in-game cinematic, showing off the further improvements made by the team, and the newly added high-poly makeovers for each playable race to match the Pandaran's quality. Goodbye Muppet mouths, hello sleek 2014 graphics! There was a cutscene after the Alliance and Horde starting zones on Draenor, another concluding the Battle of Shattrath, the Mak'gora between Thrall and Garrosh, and, of course, the conclusion of the final raid. By this point, the cinematics team is very good at this, and they've set an exceptionally high bar for themselves. WoD was, and is, considered one of WoW's worst expansions ever, but the team behind these in-game cinematics was always held up as paragons at Blizzard, despite fans being largely disappointed by the game itself. With Legion just around the corner and a return to form promised, the sky was the limit with what these talented and passionate artists could create, the stories they could tell, and the legendary events they could depict with this game's recently refreshed, shiny models and new technology. Legion had a lot of in-game cinematics, man. They were solidified by this point as key aspects of the storytelling, and they looked better than ever. The Demon Hunter starting experience, the death of Ysera, the broken shore. Legion's use of these cinematics is, I would argue, still unsurpassed to this day, with one very notable exception. One that was largely overlooked by the community, overshadowed as it was by so many other epic contenders. Stormheim, and the duel between Sylvanas Windrunner and Genn Greymane. Before I get into the events of the cinematic itself, I need to explain a little refresher course here on why these two are here and what the stakes of this battle are. Starting with someone I know everyone is sick of hearing about, Sylvanas. Sylvanas is, in simple terms, not a nice person. She was the Ranger General of Quel'Thalas, ancient kingdom of the High Elves, blah blah blah. She was a great archer among a people famous for their archery, so much so they basically made her Queen of the Archers. Sylvanas protected Quel'Thalas with her incredible archery until the day that Arthas came. She was killed by Arthas and risen from death, transformed into a banshee, a husk of her former self, and slave to the Lich King's will. Until she wasn't. Sylvanas and many other undead minions of the Lich King were freed from his mind control when Illidan Stormrage led an assault on Icecrown Citadel at the behest of Kil'jaeden. The Lich King was forced to consolidate his power, and this left the undead on the fringes of his command free to regain their own wills. Sylvanas took command of these newly freed undead and proclaimed herself the Banshee Queen of the Forsaken, installing herself as leader in the Undercity, a subterranean lair beneath the ruins of what was, until recently, the human kingdom of Lordaeron. Sylvanas and the Forsaken swore themselves to revenge against the Lich King, the man responsible for their fates, and found themselves allying with the Horde, who shared their goal and did not despise them for being undead, like the Alliance did. They were, however, profoundly disappointed when that revenge was ultimately delivered unto them. Sylvanas was so unsatisfied with the feeling of revenge that she did something I'm not allowed to talk about on YouTube, and went to Warcraft's version of Hell. Sylvanas quickly realized that she'd rather not be in Hell, and that living as an undead monster was better than the afterlife waiting for her. Luckily for her, the Lich King had left behind some undead angels called Valkyr, who offered to save Sylvanas from Hell and serve her in the living world. Sylvanas agreed and was whooshed back to life with a singular aim in mind: do whatever she can to live forever. When she died, the Valkyr saved her by taking her place in Hell, but there are a limited number of them, and Sylvanas has made enemies everywhere. Why are you doing this? Why? I love you. Please be quiet. If Sylvanas dies again, another Valkyr can fill in for her, but if she runs out of them, she will die and go to Hell permanently. Her motivation is to do whatever it takes to avoid this fate. Fast forward to the events of Legion, where Sylvanas has been made War Chief of the Horde. Conveniently for her, the Burning Legion's invasion into Azeroth stems from a temple on the Broken Isles, home to the land of Stormheim and the Halls of Valor. The Halls of Valor and its antithesis Helheim are where the Valkyr come from, and Sylvanas figures she can take advantage of the war with the Legion to do some angel shopping. Sylvanas strikes a deal with the Sea Witch Helya, and procures a MacGuffin called the Soul Cage, an artifact that can manipulate powerful beings into doing her bidding. With the help of her Forsaken and the Horde player character, Sylvanas infiltrates Skol Dashil and attempts to bind the goddess Aegir to her will, hoping to force Aegir into granting Sylvanas more Valkyr, and thus more lives. Throughout this excursion, Sylvanas and the Forsaken are hunted by Genn Greymane and the Gilnean Worgen. So, who are they, and what do they want? Genn Greymane is the long-standing king of the Kingdom of Gilneas, a former powerhouse during the events of the First War, who then seceded from the Alliance after the Second by building a massive wall isolating his kingdom from the world. Gilneas flourished behind their wall, for a bit, until the Scourge came. In a desperate bid to drive out the Scourge, Genn had the wizard Arugal summon these werewolves called Worgen and set them loose upon the undead. This tactic succeeded in driving out the Scourge, but it also created a new problem. The Worgen turned on the Gilneans and inflicted them with their curse. slowly turning the citizens into mindless feral beasts. King Greymane had successfully repelled threats from outside his kingdom, but had inadvertently brought about its gradual destruction from within. During the Cataclysm expansion, War Chief Garrosh Hellscream commanded that Sylvanas and the Forsaken besiege Gilneas and claim it for the Horde. The Great Wall was breached and the city invaded, but the citizens of Gilneas were already in the midst of civil war and furry corruption. Sylvanas herself led an attack against King Greymane, now a Worgen himself, and aimed a black arrow at his heart. But Genn's son, Prince Liam, jumped in front of the arrow and sacrificed himself to save the old man. Sylvanas rode off, declaring that they would meet again, and Genn swore vengeance upon the Banshee Queen for murdering his child. So here they are, 3 expansions and 6 years later, facing off in Stormheim. Genn has been tracking Sylvanas throughout her mission, has learned of her plans, and has come to put a stop to them. This cutscene is the culmination of years of suspense building between 2 characters, their tragic interactions and pure hatred for each other bubbling over almost every time they're on screen. They're locked in an eternal battle for each other's heads, and this is the payoff after years of character building and technological development. Finally, in Legion, Blizzard has the tech and the writing chops to create the most epic battle between these 2 characters. This ain't no Wrathgate with the Muppet mouths, folks. This is badass, legendary, tear-jerking animation with 2016 graphics, baby! Let's see it play out. The cinematic starts with an over-the-shoulder shot of Sylvanas dominating Aegir with the Soul Cage. Aegir tells her to stop, and Sylvanas hits her with a no. Everything is going according to plan for the Banshee Queen until...
Sylvanas, your quest for immortality has left you vulnerable.
Oh, hey, Genn. What are you doing?
I will have my vengeance!
You snuck up on Sylvanas, masterfully, by the way, given the context of what came before this. More on that in a moment. She even had her back turned to you. Sylvanas Windrunner, legendary ranger and noted massive ear haver, has her back to you, and you gave away your presence. To do what? You're even raising your voice. What are you doing? So Genn jumps down and starts spewing his war cries, which is so classic Warcraft. Every swing is for something meaningful, but all of the power of these words is sucked out by the big wolf missing literally every attack. Sylvanas repeatedly and easily dodges every blow, barring the most obviously telegraphed one, of course. But okay, the big wolf finally lands a decisive blow, knocking down his hated enemy in the name of the son that she took from him so long ago. The murderer of your child is kneeling in front of you, Genn, and you have superhuman speed and dexterity as a Worgen. Don't savor this moment. Finish it. Instead, Genn stands perfectly still at a distance and waits while his enemy, archer extraordinaire Sylvanas Windrunner, draws her bow and knocks an arrow, completing the transformation of this attack from winnable ambush to pretty much guaranteed loss. Genn doesn't have any armor. He even removed his shirt for this fight for some reason. And look at the distance he needs to close between himself and the world's most talented archer. Then, something truly baffling happens. Genn starts to close the gap, doing the only thing he can do in this position, which is to charge Sylvanas head on. This, to a marksman of Sylvanas' caliber, is what we might call an easy shot. But if you look closely, you'll see that Sylvanas never actually raises her bow to even attempt to shoot him. She knocks an arrow, steadies herself, and then aims her bow at the floor while Genn charges her. She had ample time to shoot him as he charged. This isn't a question of reflexes, it's Sylvanas. First of all, she's an elf, who have greater than average dexterity in Warcraft and fantasy as a whole, but she is, and I repeat myself again, one of the most famous legendary archers in Warcraft. Here comes her rival, the one person between herself and immortality, by the way, and she lets him gain the upper hand by closing the distance between them. So Genn charges, and then he misses. Now, if you're currently headed to the comments section to point out my idiocy for missing the entire point of this cutscene, I urge you to be patient. You and I, as neck-bearded Warcraft fans, know that Genn's goal here is not to outright kill Sylvanas, but to take the soul cage from her, thus cutting off her immortality. To take her future, as Genn will put it so succinctly in a moment. So Genn doesn't actually miss his swing here, but rather succeeds in swiping the soul cage right from Sylvanas' hip. It's genius, see, because the audience feels exactly as Sylvanas does, mocking Genn for missing his attack while not realizing until the big reveal that he's tricked her. If you slow down the footage and go frame by frame, the cinematics team even took the time to show the soul cage being pulled from Sylvanas' waist as Genn swipes. It's perfect for first-time viewers who wouldn't catch it, and a reward for those looking back knowing what is to come. But if we keep going frame by frame, we see that they made a mistake by showing Genn's hand on the upswing of that blow, the hand that should be holding the soul cage, and it isn't there. It's pretty hard to miss, being the big, glowing blue lantern that it is. This is an animation oversight, a technical error which also serves to deceive the audience regarding the soul cage's position. After Genn makes this move, the soul cage just magically disappears from the screen and is not revealed again until the most dramatic moment. Given Sylvanas' position here, she should see the soul cage, clear as day, in Genn's hand. Or paw. Especially in this dark room, which was luminously bright before this cutscene started, by the way. More on that later. But no, frame by frame, the soul cage is nowhere to be found, despite Genn having nowhere to hide it. Now, I'm not stupid, audience. I know why this was done, and so do you. Dramatic effect is a big part of these cutscenes. It always has been. Hiding the soul cage from the audience until Sylvanas herself sees it adds to the tension and release of the scene. I get that. Fans of Greymane are forced to watch helplessly as their hero is defeated in combat by his arch-nemesis, only to be brought back from the edge of despair when Genn takes the upper hand for the last time and delivers vengeance. Fans of Sylvanas get to watch their Banshee Queen be a total badass until that no-good werewolf steals victory from her grasp. This was the goal of the cinematics team when constructing this whole play, a back and forth between heroes of the Alliance and Horde, with both sides having their triumphs and tribulations, so the fans of each faction could celebrate their team. The problem is that this meta goal took priority over organic storytelling. And the result is an impressive visual display that falls apart the more you think about it. Hiding the soul cage is a cheap trick, only good for a first-time viewing experience. Upon rewatch, you know you're being lied to.
Oh, Stormheim! Oh! Also known around the office as Genn versus Sylvanas. How many people here we got on Team Genn? How about Team Sylvanas? I anticipated that, yeah, okay. But herein lied the challenge, right? This was going to be a big, epic fight scene, and we've done lots of those, but this was going to be different. This was not Thrall versus Garrosh. This is not good versus evil, light versus dark. This is two current faction leaders that are currently leading the Alliance and the Horde, going toe-to-toe in what could become a bloody battle to the death. So how do we handle that? It's very, very delicate work, because while it's always in our mind that we want to create the most epic story we possibly can, we also want to be mindful to look through the lens of the players themselves and realize that the two factions are like home teams. And they're always going to be rooting and feeling like, oh, I'm in it for my team, or I'm in it for my team. So we had to be delicate and make sure that it felt good for both sides, regardless of the outcome. And as we dug into the story development and started fleshing out this fight scene and looking for all the ways that we could do the epic wolf here, or the smash here, we had to give each side their own good heck yeah moment. Where, oh, yeah, he got her, or she got him, right? And the push and pull and up and down made each side feel like that their stake in the battle had really gotten something.
This comes from BlizzCon 2016's in-game cinematics panel, hosted by Taryn Gregory, the in-game cinematics director. Taryn explains the team's logic behind the Stormheim cinematic, and it explains a lot of the reasons why it comes across as awkwardly as it does. First of all, and I know this isn't super relevant, but this isn't good versus evil? Sylvanas' goal here is to steal angels from a holy being by literally enslaving her with dark magic just to keep herself alive, and to create more undead followers. Genn's goal is to stop her from doing this while seeking vengeance for the son that was murdered by Sylvanas years ago when she tried to take over his kingdom with biological warfare. It's about as black and white as you can get, but that's not even the important part. What's important is how the cinematics team viewed this duel as a kind of sports game, with fans of the characters each being given wins and losses to maximize the crowd's hype. This approach forces Sylvanas to keep her bow aimed at the floor, and Genn to give away his ambush, because without these clearly incoherent choices, the battle wouldn't be as even as it ended up being. The cinematics team wasn't interested in telling a story where two characters with a tragic history fought to the death over a chance at immortality, but rather showing off an epic battle between two combatants who seem hell-bent on letting the other get a few licks in before ultimately walking away like nothing ever happened. It's an approach to storytelling that puts what's flashy before what makes sense, which, again, can be fun and interesting when you see it for the first time, but it makes you scratch your head upon reflection. There will be those watching who don't care to look deeply at these cinematics. They'll argue that the point of these has been and always will be the bombast and drama that comes with Warcraft's fantasy setting, and they may be right. I'm not under the delusion that Warcraft cinematics are some form of high art, but they do have, and should have, a standard that we hold them to. Look back to the Wrathgate for a classic example. The Wrathgate was able to do so much without including any of the kind of silly oversights we see in Stormheim. There's never a moment where someone does something out of character for the sake of drama. Instead, the drama comes from characters behaving exactly as we'd expect them to. Dranosh charging the Lich King was foolish, yes, but it was also quintessentially orcish. It doesn't compare to Sylvanas simply watching as her sworn enemy closes the distance between them. Nor is there a moment where something as obvious as a bright glowing object is hidden from the viewer to cheat or reveal. The Forsaken are the closest thing, hidden strategically behind a cliff, waiting for their moment to strike. And their vengeance was not only a dramatic reveal, but created lasting consequences for the story. Genn's soul swipe here will have some lasting consequences, for a bit, but it comes at the expense of narrative cohesion. Why aim for the soul cage in the first place when you could just hit Sylvanas? You literally just knocked her down, and you're charging again for a follow-up attack. You know she can be hurt. All you need to do is close the distance. Genn has shown that he's incredibly precise when he needs to be, able to swipe an artifact from Sylvanas' waist without her even noticing in the midst of a head-on charge. If he can smash the soul cage, great, but if he can kill Sylvanas first and then smash it, even better. He's settling for a victory that means Sylvanas may not be able to revive herself in the future, while guaranteeing she remains an active threat in the meantime, thus inadvertently causing the deaths of thousands, and allowing her to continue looking for alternative solutions. In case you think I'm reaching here, Sylvanas literally does go on to find an ultimate solution to her death problem in Shadowlands, after nearly genociding a race of people and starting a world war, which could have all been avoided had Genn put her down here. Imagine a Warcraft timeline where the Banshee Queen dies in Stormheim. Some may argue that Genn deliberately chooses not to kill Sylvanas here because he wants her to suffer from the pain of this loss, and to go on living knowing that she's doomed to hell eventually, to poetically inflict the kind of suffering onto her as she did to him when she killed his son. But if you think that, you don't really know Genn Greymane. All this dude ever wants is to kill Sylvanas. He talks about it almost every chance that he gets. Not only that, but I don't believe that he's that stupid. Genn is driven by vengeance, yes, but he also recognizes the fact that so long as Sylvanas lives, especially as war chief of the Horde, with an incredible arsenal of weapons and troops at her disposal, countless lives hang in the balance. The Banshee Queen is a narcissistic, dangerous threat to everyone around her. A fact solidified to Genn in Cataclysm and only proven more true as time went on. His decision to attempt a theft here rather than an assassination belies his intelligence, a desire for revenge, and it makes no sense unless the writers have a meta goal of granting wins to both sides of the conflict without removing any valuable pieces from the chessboard. Imagine that.
So we had to be delicate and make sure that it felt good for both sides, regardless of the outcome.
So Sylvanas lands a black arrow in Genn's chest, which looks pretty big and pretty close to his heart. But it doesn't limit his mobility at all, because he then reveals the soul cage and smashes it against the ground as if it's made of actual glass instead of some kind of magical material. Sylvanas is made slow and blind here, unable to draw an arrow before Genn makes his move, and unable to see the obvious blue glow that would be emanating from the cage tucked against his bare chest. The cinematics team doesn't include this glow until the cage is revealed, because it would highlight Sylvanas' idiocy when she starts to monologue, cheating the audience in favor of a dramatic reveal, just like before. The massive arrow lodged firmly in his pectoral muscle doesn't impede his ability to raise his arm and bring it down with enough force to smash a magical artifact. And yeah, like I said, the thing just breaks like a normal lantern. There's no magic required to break it. There's no enchantment holding it together. Even though it's an item capable of enslaving a god like Aegir, it's as fragile as a regular old lantern. It's pretty damn lucky that when Sylvanas went ragdolling across the floor here, she never put enough weight on the thing to break it. So Aegir is released from her bonds and floats away, content to let Sylvanas just walk this one off, I guess. And speaking of going away, you're just gonna let him leave? I remember seeing this for the first time while leveling in 2016 and thinking, that's it? Genn Greymane just took Sylvanas' future away from her, as he says, and delivered his revenge, but it's not like he incapacitated Sylvanas before leaving. On the contrary, he is limping away, while she just stands there, angrily gripping her bow. Is she stupid? She has every reason to pursue Genn, or at least send another arrow right into his spinal cord. He turns his back to her and walks away like an action hero, and she just lets him go. It's baffling, and could have obviously been avoided if the writers utilized the giant angel who is the centerpiece of this play. You could just have Aegir break free from her bonds, and rather than floating away uselessly, she imprisons Sylvanas instead, shackling her with holy light, while Genn either limps away to lick his wounds, or is restored to health by the Valkyr. As written, Aegir threatens Sylvanas earlier in the cutscene, and then does nothing when given power over her. A setup with no payoff. And Genn just walks away, while the Banshee Queen angrily grabs the weapon that she could easily kill him with right now. Let's add some context. The cinematic is just shy of 2 minutes long, but it, like every cinematic, is surrounded by storytelling elements conveyed through quests and dialogue. I mentioned earlier that Genn sneaking up on Sylvanas was impressive given what came before, because what came before was him shrieking a war cry with 4 Gilnean guards and the Alliance player character as they stormed into the vault, flanked on either side by Valkyria aspirants duty-bound to protect Aegir. You heard that right. Greymane did not come here alone, and did not come quietly. Setting aside the player character, whose place in this story is complicated at best, what happened to his Grey Watch guards? What happened to his shirt? Why was it clearly daytime and bright in the vault, but dark in the cinematic? Obviously, I know why. Again, it's for dramatic effect, just like everything else in this. But then why bother setting up the quest this way? Did the quest design team not get the memo that the cinematics department wanted it dark and lonely inside the vault? Where are the Valkyria guards and the Valkyr themselves, shown from both the Alliance and Horde POV to be standing vigilantly alongside Aegir prior to the beginning of the cutscene? Sylvanas is shown to have dispatched at least a few guards from the Alliance POV, but there are dozens standing right in front of her when she charges in. And I know I said that we can set aside the player character, but what if we didn't? The canonicity of the player character's actions have always been complicated in WoW, a byproduct of the MMORPG as a storytelling medium. In single-player games, the player is the only character who can make lasting changes on the world, but multiplayer games like WoW complicate this. Classic World of Warcraft saw the player growing from humble beginnings to the Slayer of Gods and Savior of Azeroth, a power scaling that only escalated as time went on. We defeated the Fire Lord, slew dragons, and assassinated the Scourge's top lieutenants, and that was just classic. The Burning Crusade saw the defeat of Illidan and Kil'jaeden, then the Lich King and Wrath. The list goes on. As expansions came and went, the player character's power level continued to scale to astronomical heights, dwarfing those of even Azeroth's mightiest heroes. Legion doubled down on this problem by giving players legendary weapons from WoW's lore, including the Ashbringer and Doomhammer. Now we were not only powerful, but the sole inheritors of legacies and artifacts handled by figures like Tyrion Fordring and Thrall. Just be careful not to drop them. I hear those magical artifacts can be very fragile. This godlike power and track record of putting baddies in their place creates an obvious problem for narrative designers who want to create tense, grounded scenes between adversaries if the player character is nearby. In Gilneas, the player was still fresh out the Worgen womb and incapable of stopping Sylvanas from killing Prince Liam. But now? The Alliance and Horde player characters spend all of their time in Stormheim being granted power by gods and dragons, culminating in their being blessed and chosen by a Shieldir to enter Aegir's vault for judgment. Neither Sylvanas nor Genn could have entered Aegir's chambers in the first place were it not for the player character whom they relied upon to obtain this blessing. And evidently, once a Shieldir grants passage to an individual, the gates just stay open for anybody to follow them, regardless of intent. The Valkyria are portrayed as comically underprepared for their job here. Again, for the sake of the dramatic moment. Why would the doors stay open to let someone like Sylvanas inside, while we have to go through the purification ritual? So the player character is hyped up for dozens of quests, and ultimately left out when the big moment comes. Sylvanas welcomes the Horde champion to bear witness to the new dawn for the Forsaken, while the Alliance POV is much more egregious. Genn encourages the player character to charge with him and his guards, asserting that Sylvanas will finally pay for her crimes, and leads us with a triumphant battle cry. The writers draw direct attention to the player's agency here, only to fall flat on their faces and stumble in the dark looking for a reason neither the guards nor the player character have an impact on the outcome. Players simply watch the cutscene and are teleported to their respective faction base camps where they're told, "Wow, that was cool, huh? Shame you couldn't do anything to influence the outcome." Horde players are told we underestimated Greymane's tenacity, which is just lazy, and the Alliance POV is again even sloppier. Alliance players are told that they had to be rescued by Lorna Crowley and the Gilneas Brigade before Sylvanas' poison killed them, meaning the writer's justification for the player character's uselessness is that Sylvanas actually took them down off-screen despite having been blessed by a Shieldir with divine protection, being a total badass, and the cinematic starting with Sylvanas' back to the entrance that we came through. It's a truly bizarre choice, made by writers who evidently did not communicate with the cinematics department before approving the structure of these quests. There are very simple tweaks one could make to rectify the dissonance, like removing Ayr's guards, having Genn propose sneaking into the vault by himself, or even having the vault reseal itself after the chosen champion passes through. This way, Sylvanas could have taken advantage of the Horde player character to sneak in, then the vault reseals itself until Genn shows up and does the same with the Alliance player character. The dramatic clash between what the quest design team implemented and the cinematics team created is among the most baffling narrative choices I've ever seen in Warcraft, and it still confuses me to this day. Everything about this cinematic is fundamentally broken, from the choices of the characters within it to the choices of the writing team leading up to it. So what are we left with, after all's said and done? What effect did this cinematic have on the world of Warcraft? Sylvanas loses access to more Valkyr, meaning Genn succeeded in his apparent mission, but none of that ended up mattering as she went on to broker a deal with the jailer anyway and untie every plot thread that previously held her bound to this story. It was a waste of time, and Genn should have just killed her when he had the chance. He snuck up on Sylvanas and had the perfect opportunity to ambush and assassinate her, but he threw it away to yell about his son. He was shot in the chest, very near the heart, with a black arrow, something we've seen kill people, like his son Liam, only to shrug it off and walk away while Sylvanas clenched her fist menacingly. A complete and total waste of time, remembered only for its melodrama and nonsensical mood lighting. So why did I make this video? Because this cinematic pissed me off. And it tarnishes the otherwise stellar legacy that was Legion's in-game cinematics. All of these were made with such passion and creativity by a team who proved their dedication to the craft over the course of years. This many years later, I still can't watch Varian's sacrifice on the Broken Shore without tearing up. Sylvanas' elevation to War Chief, Ysera's corruption, Suramar, all of these are stories that were perfectly capped off by cinematics that nailed the tone while also keeping character decisions consistent with their motivations. The duel between Sylvanas and Genn is a cinematic that breaks its own spine, trying to create drama by making characters behave in ways they never should. Genn gives himself away when he'd set up the perfect ambush. Sylvanas points her bow at the ground rather than at the deadly enemy approaching her. Genn lets his opponent get up after landing a decisive blow, then settles for grabbing the MacGuffin, which Sylvanas is too blind to see despite it being a bright, glowing lantern. Genn is able to smash a magical artifact against the ground to destroy it as if it were made of regular old glass, even though it didn't break earlier when Sylvanas rolled her entire body weight over it several times. Ayer is freed from her bonds and does nothing to punish her captor. Sylvanas lets her hated foe, who just stole immortality from her, limp away while she holds a deadly weapon in her hand, and the player character is considered to have been either just off screen or poisoned by Sylvanas and rescued later to account for their lack of influence over the story. It's beautifully animated, poorly constructed, deceptively communicated crap that strikes me as a low point in an otherwise terrific expansion. I think Taron Gregory nailed it when he said,
This was going to be a big, epic fight scene, and we've done lots of those, but this was going to be different.
It is different, Taron. This one sucks.